Thank you for joining us today. We are going to discuss three articles which at their core sought to explore end users, in this case students, perceptions towards CALL, computer-assisted language learning, and web-based language learning, and also specifically Second Life. The three articles that we're going to discuss, first is one by Aries, 2002, and it's titled Learner Attitudes Towards the Use of CALL. The second article we're going to discuss is from Melchor Cuoto, 2016, and it's titled Foreign Language Anxiety Levels in Second Life Oral Interaction. The third article we will be discussing is by Felix, 2004, and it's a multivariate analysis of secondary students' experience of web-based language learning. And here to discuss these three articles is first your moderator, Omar, and we have Luis Alejandro, Perla, and Diana. Okay, so the first question, well, first off, we're going to begin with the theoretical similarities and differences. And the first question in this section is, the studies at hand explored students' perceptions towards CALL in general and towards Second Life. Were you able to identify any issues related to this?
Okay, well, I think since the study is based on perceptions and perceptions are based on the student's experience towards a fact, in this case towards the technology and how technology is incorporated in their learning process of the language, I think that it would be important for the researchers to include information about their prior experience with technology, which is the case of Melchor and Couto. He did had a questionnaire to measure this background experience with technology and also their prior experience with the language. I think if the students have this background with the use of computers and mobile devices, I think they will feel more comfortable learning a language. However, in the case of Felix, 2004, he doesn't provide any information about this aspect, about the background of the students. And so I think in the case of Felix, he has some issues to establish the scope of generalization because well, the context in which he held carry out the research is very specific, and also because he is comparing two groups of students who are very different in terms of age. And one thing that I noticed is that he's attributing the differences to the age when he doesn't know more information about the participants. For instance, their educational background, their economic status, because it also has to do with their access to technology. And so he's making an assumption that explaining that the difference is because of the age when there are many other factors that might be involved.
Okay, so Perla here is making reference to the generalizability of these studies, how they're very context specific.
Okay. Also, I think that in order to see the whole picture, like how the code works in a particular institution, we need not only to hear students, but also teachers, to hear the teacher's voice, and maybe like to apply some observations, how it really works, and to check the technology and so on. Because if we hear only students' perceptions, that doesn't really shows us the complete picture of how it works in one or another institution.
Okay, so here you're making reference to the the evaluation of the CALL.
Yes.
I would add that it's important to say that all of the results were very positive towards CALL, but I consider that it's mainly, well, an important factor that we have to take into consideration is that probably the students, they like technology, especially because it was in 2002, 2004, maybe how good it was. I don't know that they really had an image about it, but just because this was new, this was something interesting, something appealing, that affected their perceptions. Well, fits their perceptions, it's fine, but what would be the academic purpose?
Okay, so here Luis is making reference to how the novelty of call perhaps influences perceptions, well, at least in that year.
And also because year by year the software is becoming more user friendly, so it's logical that the more recent, the more satisfied will be the users with the easiness in which they can work with the software.
Okay. Okay, so the second question I have for you is, as stated by Melchor Cuoto, anonymity plays an important role in confidence in oral interaction. However, how do you think this would transfer to face-to-face oral interaction?
Well,
Yeah.
well, first the issue in that article was that, yeah, the author stated that in the conversations in virtual world will decrease the levels of foreign language anxiety. However, how was mentioned by the participants that in the first session, yes, it was so, but then later on they got to know better their interlocutors, yes, and so it was not the factor anymore because this anonymity, well, disappeared, let's say. And then if to compare it with face-to-face, well, for example, if you take these interaction sessions just online, and then once you transfer in the real world, face-to-face, you're going to be it's going to be a very different environment, and so the learners may have problems with this, may have difficulties. They won't be able to express themselves that freely as online because that won't be the factor anymore. And then I think, well, actually it's like a matter of preference. If you take this interaction classes face to face or online, for example, me, I would prefer to do it face to face because I want online. I cannot see these paralinguistic features. Yeah, I cannot see the expression and so on. And it's easier for me to express myself face to face rather than online.
I think it has risk because it gives the learners a full sense of confidence because it is an artificial environment in which they can either behave as another person or behave as they are inside. Or maybe when they go to real life interaction, maybe they have problems to interact in this same way because now maybe they have insecurities about their own persona, and then doing this change, then it's gonna be, I think, even harder.
Yes.
Because it's totally a different situation, and also now in this virtual world, they don't have this possibility of learning from social cues or contextual cues or body language. And so I think it's kind of a limitation, but it can also be a temporal way to construct confidence to speak the language. So I think there should be a balance.
Yeah, I think
Maybe
I think it's a very interesting point that you raised that learning through Second Life could be a sense of false achievement that these students can gain, and once they go into the real world.
So maybe it could be done like in the beginning stages to gain confidence, but then move on to face, because also like if you do this online, you don't gain knowledge on pragmatics, which is very important when you move on to the real world and communicate with native speakers, for example.
Yes.
Completing this part, I think I'm associating this with some of my friends who actually like to play Xbox Online, and there they have these audio and they communicate more or less fluently in English. But then when you want to have a conversation with them outside, no, it's not the same.
So
I think the most important part would be how to transfer those abilities into the real life because they can communicate. The problem is this part about the confidence.
No.
And also I consider that is maybe could be an important factor the gender. What would you say about that? In this study, 5 were female and only 2 were men in the virtual world class. But I think, to be honest, that probably if they had more men, you could obtain even higher results. I would like to listen more, to read more about that part about gender and the use of these virtual reality worlds.
But
So-
based on these 3 studies, I think none of the researchers found any significant difference based on gender, right?
No.
Especially when the focus on gender Felix, he didn't really, well, there were some 5 differences, but
Not
that
significant.
was it.
Okay, well, when Luis Alejandro already made some mention or reference to the methodology of the studies where he suggested that perhaps look at the differences between gender, but all 3 of the studies had a quantitative element to them. Did you perceive any weakness in the methods used by the researchers? For example, in the perceptual learning style preference questionnaire or any other instruments that they used in the studies?
Well, the one aspect that was a little bit clear for me was about the qualitative data, because in the methodology section, he only mentions the questionnaires and he talks about the quantitative data, but then it's not really explained how did he collect the qualitative data. Was that by applying those 3 questionnaires, or did he do an interview, or it's not really stated.
You're talking about Felix, right?
Yes, sorry, Felix.
Okay, and also what we already mentioned that the variables are really different from the first study that Felix did in 2001, I think, to the one that he did in 2004, and he's comparing them when the conditions are really different. The
Yes.
learners are different, so maybe the comparison should not be that relevant for
To the study.
to the study.
And actually, I think the author makes reference to it where he says that he didn't find anything related to comparing both of the studies. So then again, what was the point comparing both studies in Felix?
The variables were absolutely different, and everything that was age, that was nationality, because in this study, the current study, there were 3 schools, right? Well, no, 5 schools, but was in Poland and in Australia. So the nationality, the mother tongue, it has an impact. And also for me was one issue actually about the language, because of this, that some schools were in Australia and the other was in Poland. So what was the language of the questionnaire? Because in this case, when we have 2 absolutely different countries that speak completely different languages, the language of the questionnaire matters a lot. So for example, the questionnaire in Poland, was it in English? Was it in Polish? If it was in English, that could be a big factor, a significant factor. In the
For
results.
me, concerning theirs, I believe that there were too many variables for the study. Instead of the fact it wasn't only one language, it wasn't only about English, it was Japanese as well, 2 courses on Japanese. When I started reading about the software that they were using, each software is completely different. How are you going to generalize something with so many variables for a single study? For me, I didn't like that.
And also about errors, well, his questionnaire was based on the learner's self-perception of their language skill and their literacy, computer literacy. So I think that instead of asking that, he could have applied a test to have a concrete information or concrete data about the actual level of each learner, and then have the comparison with the results. And I guess, or I think that in this case, when he asked the students, what is your level, they might be shy or they might be humble in their answers and say, no, I'm in the basic level and maybe this is not true. And
Okay.
also about Felix 2004, that we also already mentioned the relation between he wanted to find the relation between the style preference and
The
level-
usefulness
the
of
use-
the
perceived
software.
Perceived
usefulness.
use.
But I think he failed in designing the instrument because, well, with that instrument, maybe he could get information about the style or the learning style, but he didn't find a way to connect that with the perceived usefulness. And I think that instead of doing that, instead of looking for a learning style, he should look for the students' needs and students' interests uh, for learning the language, and then they could find a relation with usefulness.
Okay, so we've been making reference to some of the flaws here, and one being the perceptual learning style preference questionnaire. Why do you think it failed to achieve what the author was looking for, to correlate it with the perceived use?
As I already mentioned, I think it's because it's not a matter of style preference, it's a matter of the learner's goal to learn the language, or their interest and their needs more than the style preference.
And even if the learning style is quite difficult, I think, to define the learning style of so many people whom you have never even seen, because all the questionnaires were completed online. So for me, this data is not reliable.
Yes, and one person could have more than one learning style.
Yes.
Additionally,
Yes. There are
about,
more types of learning styles.
additionally about languages, well, it's not like you're gonna focus mainly in one type of, you're gonna base your class only on one type of learning style. The students, they need to develop the four skills. So even if you have that information, it's not like you're gonna base your class only on audio or visuals.
Okay, so to this point, we've talked about some of the flaws that the studies had methodologically speaking. However, do you think there's anything that we can salvage from these studies? Something that was a strong point?
Personally, the one that I liked, it was Melchor. There, he was using seven people in a control group, 7 people in an experimental group. They were at the same level, B1. He started checking the differences between how they communicated in the oral section. Probably, the only thing that I would have liked is to have more participants, because 7 for me was very limited, but I think it was a very complete study.
Yeah, the methodological section especially was very good. It was clearly explained everything, and the particularities of data collection in both groups, because they were a little bit different. So for me, it was also the strongest study. And I just want to mention one aspect about Felix. When we're talking about,
Yes.
I didn't mention many flows there. One more that I found, maybe I will be very picky, but he mentioned the consent of students, but there were many participants that were underage, and he didn't mention the consent of their parents.
Yes.
So for me, that was also an important ethical
That's
issue.
an ethical issue. Yes.
Well, in my case, I also think that Melchor and Couto is the strongest study, because I think he knew how to apply the mixed methods. On the one hand, he applied the questionnaires, and he had the demographic information about the participants, so he kind of had a filter to find similar participants
Yes. And
and have
also,
control over that.
for a study of this nature, he had a control group.
And also, he knew how to combine the methods, because he had this quantitative data, and then based on those results, he made the questions for find sense or have more information about the results, asking about their opinions or why do you choose this answer. So I think that he had a more complete study.
So the methods were connected, they weren't isolated.
Mhm.
Okay, so is there anything else you would like to add to the methodological area? No? Okay, so now regarding the data and the findings, similarities and differences, these studies were carried out in, I think we already mentioned this, in developed countries such as England, Australia, and New Zealand.
Yes.
And the findings were mostly positive.
Mhm.
How do you think the findings would differ in our context?
I think it would be very significant.
Totally.
For me, well, I am the one who knows about Mexican context, least of all among you. But from what I've seen, the teaching in Mexico, well, language learning and teaching in Mexico, as well as in Ukraine also, is more teacher-centered rather than learner-centered. And for me, COL is more learner-centered. So that would be a drastic change. And if to implement it professionally, we need trainings for both teachers and students, because both of them must be ready for this. The software also must be good, so it all needs financial resources, time from both teachers and students, so that would be difficult right now, and in order to do it professionally, it must be step by step, the whole one process. So right now, I don't think that would work.
I agree with Diana because we have a big example of that already occurred, and it was with an elementary school was implemented the encyclopedia, which was a kind of interactive board. So the government sent this hardware and software to schools where they didn't even have internet connection or they didn't have even electricity. And in many other cases, they have these resources, but the teachers were not trained on how to use these tools. So it was a failure, and yes, the equipment only yes, it was.
That's also another interesting point that you raised, that in these studies they focused on students, but what about teachers? Are teachers prepared or trained to use these types of technologies in the classroom?
So I think in our context there is a lack of facilities, problems with the internet connection, teachers need training, and also another important aspect is the computer literacy of students, because in many cases it is related to socioeconomic status. So I think it mostly would work in private institutions, not in public, because the resources are very limited.
Well, here I think there were two important things. First, these studies were done in 2002, 2004. Imagine being someone that is 65 years old, like some of the participants, in 2002. And imagine now kids that they actually are almost born technology literate these days. Especially, well, now concerning the context where I work in the Tecnológico de Monterrey. In the Tecnológico de Monterrey, first of all of your classes, they have to be related to technology, whether it's languages, whether it's mathematics, it doesn't matter. And there are many softwares that are, they try to balance the part that is teacher-based and learners self-centered classes. So yeah, that type of context, it's very important, but just like Perla was mentioning, the socioeconomic part, well, it doesn't reflect the most part of the country. But here I consider that most of the differences are because of the time.
Okay, so now the next question is related to that Felix and Aries suggested that the best way of incorporating technology in the classroom is combining it, or as an add-on or a supplement to traditional face-to-face classes. Again, relating it to our context, how feasible do you think this is, specifically perhaps at your institution?
Well, I can start. Something that I like is that there are a lot of differences between the people in Mexico. Some students, they would prefer having the whole class face to face, Some others would prefer to have only online interactions, especially there at the Tecnológico Monterrey students. Sometimes they decide, I don't want to have face-to-face classes because I can have that class online. So it depends on a lot of the students, and I really like that nowadays they have the opportunity to decide what they want.
Okay, so we're running out of time, but before we run out of time, I would like to ask you about the findings on anxiety that were found in Melchor Cuoto's study. What is your take on this?
Well, I think that the Melchor Couto actually demonstrated his hypothesis. However, there are also other issues which are more related to the students' personality traits. For instance, those extroverted students, I think they will find this type of interaction not challenging or boring for them because they like human interaction, they like to talk face to face. So for them, I don't think that would be adequate. While introverted students maybe would like it, but if they over depend on those virtual interaction, well, there probably could be also be affected because of the sociolinguistic factor. They are not developing other strategies.
Okay, good. Thank you, Bella. So that concludes our discussion on the findings, and that also concludes our discussion on the three articles. The three articles that were discussed were foreign language, anxiety levels in Second Life oral interaction, learner attitudes towards the use of call, and a multivariate analysis of secondary students' experience of web-based language learning. And here we discussed three areas. The first area were the theoretical similarities and differences, and also the second area was the methodological similarities and differences. And here we've tended to focus more on the negative aspects. However, we agree that Melchor Cuoto's study was probably the strongest in terms of methodology. And finally, we discussed some of the findings and the data that derived from all three of the studies. Do you have a final comment that you would like to add?
I think that one thing that all the studies coincided is that the best way to incorporate code in the classroom is combining it with face-to-face learning.
Okay.
Yeah, I would like to see what the very good results that Melchor received transfer into the classroom to the outside world. So, and also I would like to know more about that. Probably some gender differences if there are there, but I enjoy that one the most.
The last one.
Yeah, Melchor.
And I would agree that it should be as an add-on, but it shouldn't be tied into the curriculum. Not now. Yeah, not now, because I still think that it's like a no-wise teaching method, let's say. So we need more training, we need to be more aware of these issues. So I don't think right now it should be tied into the curriculum.
But in private context, there is.
And also we can forget that these studies are made on developed countries, and that most of the countries in the world are not like that. So no, yes, it's true that it shouldn't be in the curriculum yet, but it's important to see the benefits to little by little start incorporating them.
Okay, so thank you, and that concludes this week's session.